Now, R.L. Stine has had an extensive portfolio over the years of creating stories. He's, of course, had the amazing Goosebumps book series, which has a lot of wonderful hits in it. Haunted Mask, Welcome to Dead House, The Werewolf of Fever Swamp that we all love. You also have the Fear Street series, which is young adult horror. A lot of people enjoy Fear Street just because it hits home. It's very relatable to us, and it deals with more violence and realistic crime stuff than what Goosebumps does. You also have point horror. Point horror is kind of like Fear Street, except it's sort of built on it. It kind of has a little bit longer stories, more fleshed out, and sometimes they're even more crazy and wild than what Fear Street typically goes for. And then, of course, you have his short story collections, Haunting Hour, Nightmare Hour, and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff can end up becoming formulaic. Either it hits the formula extremely well, either it hits the formula kind of in the middle, or sometimes it hits the formula and it's not that good. But we end up liking Goosebumps for that because it's very nostalgic. But occasionally, R.L. Stine manages to do certain work that's very different, very out of the norm, and because he takes that step forward, because he decides to step out of his comfort zone and do something that we all basically don't expect him to do, it can sometimes end up being smash hits. Big examples of that: I Live in Your Basement. That's a Goosebumps book that is not like any other books he's written, which is considered to be ghost written, but we have no confirmation yet. And there's obviously some other works that feel very much different to him. Ghost Next Door. Ghost Next Door doesn't feel like a Goosebumps book. It feels way too emotional for what he usually does, and yet it's a smash hit. So without further ado, I want to talk about not a Goosebumps or mainstream R.L. Stine story that hits, a ballpark that's not in his normal range, but it still manages to land quite well. And this one's actually an untold story. This is a story that not many people know about. This is one kind of from an obscure collection, so I want to bring it to your attention so that way you can enjoy it. So without further ado, let's talk about R.L. Stine's most underrated story, in my opinion, which is actually from a short story collection. This short story is from a short story collection that was made in tribute to Alvin Schwartz, and it's called Don't Turn the Lights Out. Now, I initially had a review up on my old anime/manga channel that I used to do, but I decided, you know what, let me bring back the story because I thought this story was unique. I thought it was pretty well done, and I thought he actually went out of his comfort zone for once, which is something I always commend because R.L. Stine has the tendency, since he goes down the formulaic route, we end up getting bored. When he decides to do something new that we don't expect, that to me is still at least somewhat rewarding, even if it doesn't hit the mark. But in this case, he did manage to bring something good. And Don't Turn the Lights Out, it has 35 short stories in it from various different authors, but it's actually edited by Jonathan Mayberry. Jonathan Mayberry is a very prolific horror writer. He's a huge author and he's got a lot of fans. I know Michael Goosebumps fan, also known as Night of the Living Dude, and Mr. Wildboy 94. He is a Jonathan Mayberry fan, so shout out to Michael out there if you're listening. This book was edited by him, and it has quite a bit of, I would say, decent to alright to some good stories in there, but R.L. Stine actually did manage to land a hit, and that is The Ghost in Sam's Closet. Now, the reason why this story is unique because it actually goes down a different route to what Stine normally does. Usually his stories are first-person dialogue, kind of like in retrospect, the character will be reflecting on their life and telling a story. And again, it's told from first person. And occasionally you do have third person in there, but first person is usually what Stine usually is comfortable with. But here you do get a first-person perspective, but it's not from the main character. In fact, this time, the perspective is done through the lens of the villain. So this short story, as you can tell by the title, is about a ghost that may or may not be in a boy's closet. And the story actually opens up with the ghost themselves talking about their life, their perspective, haunting this little boy. So you have this ghost. They explain that, ghosts are kind of meant to be terrifying in the eyes of humans. We have a certain perception towards them, and therefore their job is kind of to scare us because it's how they're kind of able to redeem their life and then go into the afterlife. So this ghost is describing how many ghosts wander around Earth if there's some part of their life that's been unsatisfied. And in order to go into the higher life, into the afterlife, you have to end up fulfilling your purpose. You have to scare a kid. You have to redeem yourself in the ghost form on Earth. And that way you can travel on to the great beyond. that is actually pretty deep for an R.L. Stine story, and I think that that's actually a great concept to do, because there was a book out there that I absolutely hated called Why I'm Not Afraid of Ghosts by, I think, the A.G. Cascone sisters. It's from The Ghost of Fear Street. That's the worst kids horror book I've ever read, and it did deal with a ghost perspective, but that ghost perspective was done in a completely goofy way, while here Stine is actually taking some risk by going down deeper themes. So the ghost sets up the fact that, it's trying to scare this kid named Sam. It wants to redeem itself, and you actually find out that you're a little bit sympathetic towards the ghost, because this ghost was sort of wimpy and scrawny in its human life. It was kind of bullied, and it's sort of like an underdog character. So in a way, this is like a coming of age for a ghost. So it's like a coming of after age, after life story. I think that's kind of what R.L. Stine is going for here. And what ends up happening in the story is that as the ghost ends up deciding to kind of hype itself up, reflect on its life, reflect on its philosophies, and reflect on its job in Sam's life, it then decides, you know what, I'm going to scare this kid. And the way Stine writes it is extremely well done, because the ghost is basically hyping themselves up, and it very much sounds sort of like a serial killer or predator or, bigger level threat hiding in this closet. It sounds very much like a human stalker hiding in a kid's closet and trying to scare them, which is actually pretty well done, because the fact that you get this supernatural entity that's sympathetic, and now they're placed into a situation where they have to scare somebody and do something potentially evil and become this villain that they don't really need to be or want to be, but they're forced to be. That's actually multiple layers of character dilemma that Stine manages to do in a short story. The story is only like 7 or 8 pages, and yet he manages to execute that well. And then when the ghost actually gets out of the closet, it passes by a mirror. And in this mirror, it kind of symbolically represents how, its life has been, because it's kind of looking into a mirror, seeing what it's become, seeing its life, and now you're at the moment. You're at this glorious moment where you can finally fulfill your purpose. And when it looks in the mirror and thinks that it's going to be this scary demon, this monster that's going to scare the life, kind of admiring itself and taking pride, it ends up actually being a piglet. That's right, it actually ends up being a small, cute little pig. And that was the form that the ghost took on. And in that moment, the ghost realizes that all of its hope and dreams are basically crushed, because you had this entire setup by Stine saying that it was going to be this terrifying ghost, this creature, this demon that was going to scare the life out of a kid, kind of written like an urban legend or creepypasta in a way. But now, at the moment of where it's supposed to shine, now this ghost finds out that it's a pig. And that's actually symbolically very important, because the idea that this terrifying ghost that was set up for 7 pages actually ends up becoming this very cute, non-threatening, hardly able to take serious little piglet, that reflects on pigs, because pigs represent the idea of gluttony. The ghost in this case bit off more than it could chew. It became too greedy, it became too gluttonous, and this ghost decided, you know what, even though I was scrawny, even though I was the underdog in my past life, this is my chance. I can turn around who I am. I can become something more than I am. And what ends up happening is, well, that's not the case. That's not always the case in life. Sometimes you don't end up having a coming of age story. Sometimes you just stay the same age forever. And that's something that you have to come to grips with. And this ghost finally does come to grips with that. It realizes, you know what? All that setup that I had, all that setup that the reader was reading through, thinking that something was actually going to happen in the story, in fact, nothing happens in the story. And that's, again, a reflection of life. Sometimes the sad reality of life is that nothing happens that you spend money for, build up your time for, build up your emotional investment to. Nothing comes out of that. So you kind of have to come to grips with that and understand that that's not always the case. You can't always be rewarded. And the idea of becoming a ghost is the idea that you have an unfulfilled purpose. You had certain standards placed for yourself, and those standards came crashing down. So like a pig, this pig ends up becoming too gluttonous, and it's setting itself up for slaughter. Because now during the game moment, there's nothing that this ghost can do. So what ends up happening? he freaks out. And then Sam starts laughing at him. And the final line in the story is basically the ghost going, "What's so oinking funny?" And this is, again, a play on the jungle. There was a book written back in the old days about the meat slaughtering plant. Basically, people would fall inside of meat processing machines. There would be feces and different disgusting things ending up in some of the food we ate. And that shows how we mistreated animals, how a lot of the time we are factory farming. And because we're factory farming, these animals don't have a chance to live the life that they want to live. And therefore, because of that, that's why he's saying, "What's so oinking funny? Why is my punishment as a pig? Why is the way that I'm treated so horribly by humans a laughing point for you?" And that's reflecting on what society is doing at the point. We are not giving animals the level of respect. We're not treating them in the level of respect that hunters would do or other people know. Instead, we're treating them like commodities. It's the commodification of sentient life. And that's something that has to be acknowledged. Okay? Livestock are basically slaves. And in this case, this ghost was a slave to its circumstance. Sam is the one with the power in this case, and Sam is therefore abusing it. It's not taking pig rights seriously. This also plays on, Winnie and Pooh. Piglet dealt with some emotional depression. All the different animals have a sort of like mental condition that they deal with. Here in this case, it's anxiety. It's certain mental gripes that the ghost has towards himself, and that is reflected within the story. And I think that Stine overall did a great job. The fact that the story has this many layers, the fact that the story manages to accomplish all these things and really reflect on how our society is within a kid's horror format and pay tribute to scary stories to tell in the dark by actually making a story not scary, by actually making a story that disappoints the expectation you have and then reinforces it with comedy, because life is a divine comedy, the same way Dante's Inferno was written. Life is a comedy. We have to laugh at ourselves, but some things aren't laughing matter, especially when it comes to the idea of abuse and hardship. So what would I give this short story out of 10? I would give this short story a 1 out of fucking 10. Are you fucking high? Are you fucking smoking DMT with Marilyn Monroe's ashes, her lipstick, Elvis Presley's greasy ass hairpiece inside of that fucking blunt? Did you seriously think that this piece of shit short story was going to get a fucking 9 out of 10? The fucking ghost that was supposed to scare the shit out of the kid ends up being a fucking pig. Fucking piglet. Oink, oink. Fucking piglet, bruh. Do you think I was gonna rate this piece of fucking pig shit? This piece of fucking sausage mixed with rat doo-doo in the jungle's processing plant? Do you think that this is what I was gonna give it, bruh? This story's fucking ass. It's fucking April Fool's, bitch. It's April 1st. This whole shit was a joke. You watched the video. You fell for me yapping. Some of y'all went to college, some of y'all went to school. Motherfucking professors be yapping. They be saying shit that makes no fucking sense. I was not cooking. I was fucking burning. In fact, the crib is a whole wildfire right now. In fact, Canada is getting PTSD from the shit that I'm burning right now. Right now, American Airlines is running out of goddamn business. Boeing is praying to God the fact that my cooking is shutting down any planes from going because your fucking hatch door 30,000 feet in the air might fly off. All right? Happy April Fools, bitches. Don't fall for this shit ever again.